Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel and to my build series on this Voron 0.2 printer. We started out with a kit that I bought that was made by LDO, and we built that up, and now we're working on trying to modify this thing to create the best quality prints that I can manage. And so if you've been following along with the series for a while, you're probably tired of me saying that, but I want to always remind us that the goal with this printer, I know a lot of people build V0 style printers to try to print with a lot of speed. I don't care so much about speed. I care about detail and quality in these prints. And so today we're going to do what I hope is the very last kind of big physical update to the printer before then we start doing some fine-tuning and tweaking of things to get our settings dialed in just right. And that big change is going to be to change out the print head. And I assume you already knew that because you clicked on the thumbnail. You've probably even seen the photo of what this turns out to look like when we're done. I don't know what that's going to be yet, so hopefully it turns out good and it prints a lot better than it has been. And that's not to say that it's been printing badly, right? So I wanted to, before we start with the process of building the new Dragon Burner tool head that we're going to use to replace this mini stealth burner here, I wanted to just show you some of the test prints that I've been doing ahead of time here and kind of talk about two main things that I'm hoping we can solve by switching over to the Dragon Burner. And so I'll get this printer moved out of the way, and then I'll get you guys a closer up view of some of these test prints that I've done, and I'll point out a few things on there. Okay, so let's start with just two cubes, right? These two simple Voron cubes. And one of these was printed with the stock configuration that the LDO kit came with, right, which was the 0.4 millimeter nozzle that comes by default with our Revo Voron hot end that they shipped with the kit. And this looks pretty good, right? All I did here was I loaded the standard preset into Orca Slicer for a Voron 0.2 with a 0.4 millimeter nozzle. I didn't change any of the settings, and I didn't do a lot of tuning with the printer, and we've got pretty good results here. Trying to catch, things like layer lines and such as I talk here on the camera, so hopefully you can kind of get an idea of what the quality looks like. Even the top surface here is pretty good. It's not perfect. It's probably a bit over extruded, actually, looking at it closely here, but it's not too bad. We got a little bit of elephant's foot on the bottom here as well, but that's just Z height setting issue. The rest of it is fairly good for a 0.4 millimeter nozzle. Sort of first try without a lot of tuning on a printer. I was happy with that. However, I always knew that because I'm trying for detailed prints, I didn't want to stick with the 0.4 millimeter nozzle, and so I went ahead right away and swapped out that nozzle for the 0.25 millimeter version, which is the smallest that the Voron Revo can handle. And that did not come with the LDO kit, by the way. I have a Revo Voron in my other big Voron printer, and so I happen to have all of the nozzle sizes already, so I didn't have to go buy one, but that didn't come with the kit. You'd have to get that yourself if you wanted to switch the nozzle size and you were building from that LDO kit. So this one here that I've been holding up as I've been talking is the version of the same cube that was printed with Orca Slicer default settings again, but for a 0.25 millimeter nozzle and at a 0.1 millimeter layer height, which is Orca Slicer's default layer height for that smaller nozzle size. And we can even go finer than that with our layer height, but I'm not sure that we necessarily need to. Now, with this one, right away what I notice, here's the old one on the right and the new one on the left, the smaller nozzle size on the left. All of the corners and edges are significantly sharper and more well-defined, less rounded. I don't know if you can see that or if it's picking it up in the camera footage here or not, but yeah, that's a noticeable difference. And the other really interesting noticeable difference that I noticed right away too is I'm seeing a lot more ringing, more of these sort of horizontal ghosting artifacts on the smaller nozzle size than I was on the larger. And of course we can mitigate some of that in the future with some tuning with input shaper in Clipper, and we will definitely do that. But if I make large physical changes to the printer, I want to do all of those things first so that I'm not then wasting my effort. I would have to retune input shaper and things like that if I do things like what I'm going to plan to do today, which is to swap out the entire print head. And so yeah, so this is looking pretty good, right? So given those results, I went ahead and printed a couple of things with just the standard settings on that smaller nozzle size. So this is an example of the type of part that I would like to eventually be able to print on this printer to use, in a model kit building type of a project. and you know, to try to have this be as high quality as I possibly can. Now this came out pretty good. Like all of these little details up here in this venting up on the top here, all of these diagonal lines that printed all the way around this circular part here, they all look nice and sharp and good. There are a few issues on the underside, of course, because I had to print this with supports. So our first layer above the supports doesn't necessarily look great in all places. I think we can probably improve that a bit with some changes to the settings and the way the supports are generated. But that's actually not terrible, and this was, you know, oriented in such a way that this would be the inside of the part anyway, so that you wouldn't really see much of that. Everything else here is pretty good. Again, I'm seeing some ringing here in a few spots that we can hopefully get rid of with some input shaper calibration. But you know, little circular details like here are looking good. I really was pleased with these three little lines. They're a bit hard to see. Let me see if I can get a better camera angle here. They are evenly spaced with one another. And so I was curious to see how those turned out, you know, whether they look even. And they do. They're actually quite good. So lots of little details here look good. All of the different indented panel line details and stuff look good. There were some overhangs as well. We got a little bit of drooping on this overhang right here, but most of the rest of them look pretty good. So all in all, I'm fairly happy with this. And then I printed one more example here that's a bit of a different idea. Is, you know, very highly detailed piping details here. And we can see right away, the first thing is I need to calibrate the retraction settings here. We're getting a lot of stringing between here. And this was fairly good new dry filament. So I don't think it was a filament moisture problem. I think it's something that we can work out with our retraction settings. But that's going to depend a bit on the extruder, and we're about to change the extruder. So we'll wait on doing that. Other than that, other than again dialing in the support settings so that the supports come off a little more cleanly and don't leave quite as many little artifacts behind, I think that this came out pretty decent as well. Certainly will require a lot more cleanup, manual cleanup, than this thing would. But it's you know, for an untuned type of a print, I'm happy enough with it. And I think that, you know, the 0.25 millimeter nozzle, while I would like to ideally go to an even smaller nozzle size than that, that's the smallest size that the Voron Revo you know, provides as part of their ecosystem. And so I'm happy enough with it that we'll stick with that. And so having said all of that, I printed these test prints, and I printed a lot of other sort of regular test prints, you know, the standard ones that you'd see with most you know, 3D printing, you know, tweaking and tuning guides. And there were two things that I noticed that I am not happy with the current mini stealth burner tool head that the printer came with. And those two things are, you know, first of all, cooling for sure. Not maybe so much with these ABS prints, but when I've done some PLA prints, test prints, I've definitely noticed that the cooling performance is not great. We're having some, you know, drooping with overhangs and some things like that I think that we can do better if we had better cooling. And then the second thing is, again, not necessarily too much with these prints, maybe a couple spots down here on this one, but with some of my other test prints as well, that I've noticed is I think the extruder is a bit inconsistent. Not all the time, but I've seen some extrusion inconsistency types of issues and artifacts on some of my test prints. And so the two things that I would like to improve by switching from the default mini stealth burner over to the Dragon burner are cooling, which from what I've read and heard from other people, you know, the Dragon burner is specifically designed to have much better cooling because you can have larger fans. And then, you know, secondly, I want to improve the extruder. And so to that end, I have gone ahead and ordered an Orbiter 2.0 extruder from LDO. So this was a pre-assembled piece that just comes like this in the box. So we'll be mounting this at the top of our Dragon burner, and I have the parts printed out for the Dragon burner and the fans fitted in place already. So our final result will look, you know, something like this. And it should be lighter, easier to move around, and, you know, a bit smaller than our current print head, but hopefully with better performance. We're going to take the Revo Voron out of the current print head and, you know, slot it in here. so we're gonna have to disassemble the other one before we can build this one, but that's what the plan is for today's episode, is to go ahead and disassemble the old print head. I'm gonna take that off the printer and take it apart, at least enough to get the Revo Voron out. I don't think that I need to take any other parts out of it. I did go ahead and buy all 3 new fans here. This hot end fan, we could have potentially reused the one that we already had, but since I was ordering these other 2 larger fans anyway, I figured I'd just go ahead and do that. So yeah, we're gonna have to take that old one apart, get the hot end in here, then we'll assemble this, which is actually a fairly simple process. We'll go through that and then wire it all up to our existing tool head breakout board for our Pico Billicle, and then get it back on the printer and try it out, see how it works. That is my plan for today. Let's do it. All right, so after a little bit of prep work, I think we're ready to assemble this dragon burner. And I have done a little bit of work ahead of time here, which I haven't always done on this video series. Normally it's just live building, but I did test fit all of this because the instructions on the Dragon Burner GitHub repo, while they are pretty good, and there are a lot of good pictures to show you how all that works and fits together, there were just a few questions I had about how everything was going to fit together. And so I'm glad that I kind of pre-fit everything and I've got everything laid out here, I hope, to facilitate our assembly here. The first thing that I wanted to point out with this extruder is I had mentioned while we were disassembling the old mini stealth burner that I thought maybe we could use the same mount for our toolhead PCB that we had used for that other toolhead. And actually I have it here, I can show you the difference that I hadn't realized or hadn't noticed at the time. The motor, the extruder motor on here is oriented in such a way that the 2 holes where these standoffs are, you know, straight horizontal, right? This one's tilted at about, I don't know, like 30 degrees. And so if we were to mount that tool head board using the same mount that we had before, it would have been sitting at an angle like this, and then the umbilical cable would have been coming up out of it at a weird angle, and that wouldn't have worked. So I found this other part that I've printed here that has a couple of heat set inserts that you put in place that should line up correctly with this and then allow us to mount this so that it's still in a horizontal orientation. So I'll go ahead and, as usual, leave a link to that part down in the description of this video if you're you know, building this same thing with this same configuration. If you're not, if you've got a different extruder, I'm sure you can find a part that will work for you as well. You know, there's a good community online, right? And there's always somebody, it seems like, who has built the part that you need. So this is, I think, everything that we need laid out. Let's actually start with, I guess, the hot end. And so this one's real simple. The Dragon Burner comes with a different part for each different type of hot end. So since ours is this Revo, all we do is bolt this straight down through there. So there's, you know, 4 holes here for our 4 bolts. And we'll tighten this down nice and snug. The next thing you're going to want to do, and the length that you need is going to depend on your hot end again, but you need, you know, a piece of PTFE tubing that runs all the way down through here and as far as you can press it down into the hot end. And then for the amount that you need sticking up above this part, what I found, or at least what I did, was to measure that, I put this piece above it, which is going to be the part that the extruder sits on top of, and then you can put your extruder down on top of here. And I actually used calipers to measure up into the extruder what that distance was, so that this is reaching all the way up as far as it can go in there. So that sits nice and flush there. So that should be good to go, and I've pre-cut that to the right length. So that is our hot end. And I think then we can just go ahead and slide it here into this piece. Now, I don't think I showed you in detail how this piece works, but these fans all just slide into place. I pre-fit those, and I didn't want to take them back out because I don't want to loosen their fit. They slide in there nice and tightly, and you know, in order to minimize the possibility that fans can cause vibration and such here in the print head, I wanted to not take them out and put them back in. So those are already slid in, and then this logo here can optionally have an LED behind it, but I chose to print it just in opaque white filament, and there's a little piece here that it slides in with that pushes it in place and just holds it in there. So you can, if you want, you can put a NeoPixel LED in there I'm not going to do that in my version. And you can also optionally put a couple of LEDs down here to point down at the nozzle. Again, I've chosen not to do that. I'm trying to keep my print head as simple as possible here, as simple and lightweight and free of extra clutter. So the way that this should work is, I think we have to manage this wire by letting it come up through that way, and then we're going to want to slide this on here. So that just slides into place, and there is this nice channel here for this fan wire to come out. And then these other wires, I think we'll eventually just kind of bring them up here, and there's these two spots here where we can zip tie the wires down on the sides. So that'll be our cable management solution, it looks like. So that should be fine like that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put this piece down over the top of that. So again, making sure that we don't pinch that wire. And that looks good. And then we're going to put our extruder down on top of all of that. And we should just be able, with these two holes here, to bolt right down through the extruder and into those two heat set inserts that we already put into this piece down here. One thing I really like so far about the Dragon Burner is that the design just seems so simple, right? As far as the structural components, there were really only like 3 main structural STLs that you had to print. And they are the main housing, this red piece, and then this piece, which is different depending on your hot end to hold that, and then this piece, which is different depending on which extruder you're using. But they all fit together really easily and in a really obvious way to create that. So we basically have the structure of our entire print head done at this point. I did forget that I need to drop this M3 nut into this little slot. That's this little kind of trapezoidal piece section right there has a slot at the top of it. So let's go back, loosen this back up, and drop that in place. That's going to be needed in the future when we mount this thing onto the printer itself. There we go. So we'll drop this in here, and we'll connect this up again. Hopefully that's the only mistake I make in this assembly process. Get that down nice and tight so that it's not going to move around while we print. And then we've got 2 more screws we can put in from the back here. They go in these 2 holes to hold this thing forward, this whole unit forward into the main body of the lower half of the print head here. So that will make it nice and sturdy. And that's the basic structure complete. Now, there is an optional little crossbeam that we can put down here at the bottom, in between the bottom edges of these 2 fan ducts. And I did opt to include that. I think that it will give us some extra structural solidity across the bottom of the print head here. One thing I noticed with the mini stealth burner that I just disassembled when I had been using it to do some test prints on the printer yesterday, I believe, it had started to, when the hot end fan came on, it had started to make like a vibrating kind of a sound, kind of a high-pitched vibration, and by reaching in there and kind of messing around with some of the parts, I had realized that it was because these 2 sides were kind of vibrating. If I pinched them together, that vibration would stop. So hopefully this type of a solution might help mitigate that type of a problem. I'm not sure if we will have that with this different print head, but maybe. And so, yeah, having that little cross piece there I think is good anyway. All right, and so now all that should be left is for us to go ahead and mount our toolhead PCB up here onto the back of the extruder, on the back of the motor here. Now, one thing I think I had mentioned when I disassembled the other one, there were the metal standoffs that came with the LDO kit, and I was hoping to reuse those here. I ended up having to print, these are the official Voron provided ones that come with the Voron STLs. They are just a little bit longer than those metal ones, and create the amount of clearance we needed here. When I fit this together with the metal standoffs, it wasn't going to work. So we've switched over to these printed ones that have heat set inserts on both ends, and that should work just fine. So now, given that, we should be able to line this up like so. There's a hole up there and a hole down here that help us with this weird angle that this thing sits at. And I'm going to use these, I think these M3 by 8s, these longer ones here, and then we'll use the shorter M3 by 6s to actually attach the PCB onto the back of this piece of plastic once we've got it in place. All right, that's looking nice and solid. And so now this should sit right here like this. Did you see the tiny bug crawling around? If you did, bonus points to you. Let me know, leave a comment if you saw the tiny bug just crawl across the screen. No cheating and going back to look at it on a replay. It's the bonus of having your studio in the garage. Sometimes we get extra unexpected visitors. All right, this is now looking good. Now, here's what I need to do. Ah, the bug is back. Nope, can't get it. It escaped. I'm gonna go ahead and plug all of this stuff in, right? So we've done this in a previous episode in the series when we first assembled this thing, but all of this stuff will go up to here, and then I'm gonna use these two little channels here to run zip ties through to hold like all of these over here and this one wire over here. Now, because some of these new fan wires, because they're new fans that I bought, the wires are a bit long. And so I'm going to do this off camera, but my plan is to go ahead and shorten some of these and recrimp the ends and just make it barely long enough to be able to get up to where I need it here. And maybe I'll do some extra cable management with some zip ties around these two legs right here or something, just to hold everything out of the way so that I'm sure it's not going to interfere with the X-axis extrusion and belts. So yeah, off camera, I'm going to do some cleanup of these wires and shortening them and making sure that it's nice and clean up to the tool head, to the PCB here. And then I'll go ahead and install this on the printer. So I'll do all that off camera. The other thing that I wanted to point out that I will be doing, but I won't walk through in this video because we've done it before, is I'm going to have to change the printer config. And this extruder, this Orbiter 2.0, came with this nice little manual that actually includes, somewhere in here, yeah, the settings that you need to put in your Clipper firmware configuration. So I'll go into my Clipper config, and those files are on GitHub. So I'll again put the link to the GitHub repository where I have my configuration files. So you can go in there and see the changes that I've made if you're curious. But it's basically just changing like rotation distance and the number of microsteps and some of that stuff on our extruder motor. And so that's all nicely spelled out right there. So I'll have to put this in the configuration for my printer, and then I will have to do some of the initial setup steps again. So we'll have to reconfigure the E-steps for the extruder to make sure that we're extruding, you know, exactly the amount, the number of millimeters of filament that we request. Again, we've done that before in a past episode. I'll actually put a link to that up in the corner right now. If you missed that episode, you can go back and watch it. So I'll have to do that, and I'll have to probably calibrate the Z height again, just because the tool head's changing, and so I don't want to crash the nozzle into the print bed. So I'll do all of that stuff. We've, like I said, done that before, so I won't do that on camera. I'll leave the link up here if you want to go back and check out how to do that. So when we come back, I should have this thing on the printer and all the wires cleaned up and everything, and then we'll get it printing and see how it works. All right, we've got this assembled again. It is looking really good. Probably like the thumbnail that you clicked on, right? The wire management I'm pretty happy with. You can kind of still see it from the front here, but it comes around the back here and is nicely managed and tied down with zip ties in a few different strategic locations. So it's all not going to impede with any of the motion or any of the homing or anything like that. I've already checked those things. So what I want to do here, first of all, we'll take the door off, and let's go ahead and I'm going to turn on the part cooling fans just without the printer running. All right, so those have fired up, and the amount of airflow that I can feel coming out down here underneath the nozzle is incredible compared to what we had before. So I'm very optimistic about part cooling and how that's going to work. I think it's going to be really, really good, actually. All right, so that's excellent. And then the other thing I wanted to check real quick is just to make sure that if I turn the extruder up to some temperature, that when the extruder, the hot end fan comes on, it works. Yeah, so it's good too. And everything's looking good there. So I think that, well, first of all, I think that the camera has decided to focus on my Gundams back here and not the printer up here. Hello, we're up here. All right, cool. So that way you guys can get a better view of the printer. I think that everything's going to be good. I'm going to go ahead and do some test prints with this thing. I have calibrated the e-stops on the extruder. I've set everything up, so I'm going to send a print to this thing, and maybe I'll give you a little time lapse of the start of that print. It's probably just going to be a cube or something for now, and then in the next episode we will come back and start doing some more fine-grained tuning of this thing to get it printing at the highest level of quality we can manage. So I will say goodbye for now. I'll leave you with the time lapse of something starting to print on this thing, and I will see you next time. Hope you have a good day. Later.